I want to say a quick thank you to those who are hopping on right now. We are going to be starting the event in just about 30 seconds. So thank you for being here with us today. Okay, well, I know we're going to be having some more individuals joining us over the next couple of minutes for the next hour, but I do want to welcome everybody to today's Environment and Energy Leader webinar sponsored by Montrose. It is always a pleasure working with the team from Montrose Environmental Group, and their partner, Sensible EDP, is with them as well today. My name is Jessica Hunt, and on behalf of the entire team at E&E Leader, I welcome you to welcome today's audience to Demystifying Methane Emissions, Monitoring Regulations, and EPA Compliance. You guys are in store for a good treat today. It's been a wonderful time working with all of the presenters, getting ready for today's event. If you have questions for any of our panelists, please submit using the Q&A button, and we will do our best to get to as many of the questions as possible before the top of the hour. If we do not get a chance to answer your question, or you think of something after the live event ends, please feel free to submit it in the survey that is going to be emailed to you later this afternoon. This goes for anybody watching the event on demand as well. And you will notice in your resources section, there is a link to the Brownfields and Community Redevelopment webinar that took place last week. I highly suggest going back and watching that if you did not get a chance to. And now I'm going to turn the event over to Josh Anhalt, VP of Technology for Montrose, and he is going to be serving as today's moderator. So Josh, take it away.
Excellent. Thank you, Jessica, and thank you everyone out there tuning in. Goal of course is for you to take something away, learn something, and hopefully contribute back to the Q&A side of things. So I look forward to a dialogue going forward. Why am I here? Why am I moderating? It's because 17 years of oil and gas, methane detection and quantification across North America and globally. It was fusion emissions, tanks, compressors, seals, sequestration, measuring it, finding it, detecting it, and reporting it. And I'm really proud to be here today with Bob Stout, Stefan Bokaemper, and Amy Voigt, leaders in their own regards. Bob, take a moment to introduce yourself, say hi, and let people know why you're here.
Thank you, Josh. And really appreciate this opportunity to talk about this important subject. I am currently a senior fellow at the Duke Nicholas Institute. I also am a senior fellow and now working with the University of Texas, Colorado State, on the Colorado School of Mines on an initiative called the Energy Emissions Modeling and Data Lab, which focuses on looking and measuring emissions across the value chain. And I retired after almost 30 years at BP at the end of 2020, where I was the head, last job was the head of policy and regulatory affairs. And for about 10 years now, and continuing in my post-BP consulting work, I've really focused on methane emissions, and there's tremendous opportunity with advanced technology. It's a problem we can solve. It's a problem we need to solve for climate reasons, as well as geopolitical and economic reasons. So I'm really excited to be part of this conversation and looking forward to it.
Thanks, Bob. Stefan, take a moment to say hi to the crowd.
Yeah, thank you, Josh. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm the CEO of Kuva Systems. We are solution provider for low-cost camera-based continuous methane emission monitoring. I'm an energy engineer by training, originally from Germany, been living in the US for 20 years. I've spent some time with industrial companies like Siemens and now with several startups. Kuva is a low-cost solution focused on not just detecting emissions, but really working with operators on the right workflows, both for environmental compliance and then also for actually enabling field operators to fix leaks that were found.
Some thanks, Stefan. Amy, say hello.
Hi, everyone. My name is Amy Voigt. I am an air rep with Western Midstream Partners here in the Denver area. Wes has assets that span across the DJ, the Delaware, the Eagle Ford, Powder River, Green River basins. We're far-ranging. I've been working with Wes to implement an air monitoring program at our operations. Prior to joining Wes, I was with a private E&P operator here in the DJ basin where I helped them establish their pre-production air monitoring program. As you might have seen from my bio, I'm a data nerd. I'm currently working on my master's in data science at the University of Denver, which was largely inspired by just like the sheer volume of data we're able to obtain from our operations and particularly from air monitoring. So I'm excited to see the potential of this data to help us achieve our emission reduction goals. And I'm eager to delve into this topic with you all. So thanks for having me.
Yes, thank you, panel. It's there's a lot obviously going on in North America, United States, Canada, and globally. I've been spending some time overseas working in Egypt and other areas of North Africa. And I can say that the efforts ongoing there echo what I'm seeing in North America as well, is that decarbonization through methane reductions and measurement and detection is a hot topic. Not just because it's popular at the moment, but because it operates at the intersection of compliance, climate change, social initiatives, and capital forces that allow us to create excellent energy for planet Earth. And there's a lot of acronyms out there when it comes to regulations. And Stefan, can you just roll us through these boxes here and give the audience a sense of like what is coming at us and why Amy is going to be experiencing a tsunami of data coming her way?
Yeah, thank you, Josh. So what we see here is kind of like a 30,000-foot overview on all the things that I would say we as an industry in oil and gas have to deal with, say, in the next 24 to 36 months. I think the focus of the webinar will be on really what's ahead of us the next 6 to 12 months, which is EPA regulation and methane fee. But this is meant to be a little further out view, like 2 to 3 years. So we have, if we start with legislation, we see the Clean Air Act, out of which we have the VOC rules, Quad OA, Quad O, Quad OA, the upcoming methane rules, Quad OB and Quad OC, GHGRP reporting, Subpart W, and now EPA has announced in their enforcement priorities that oil and gas methane emissions will be the #1 enforcement priority across the entire agency. We've got state methane laws, Colorado, New Mexico, others coming, Inflation Reduction Act, methane fee. There's the 45V hydrogen tax credit, which will have implementation rules that have focus on methane intensity for natural gas used to produce hydrogen. There will be feedbacks for data and compliance, different sort of compliance. Methane emission reduction program funding yet to be announced, but it's over $1 billion yet to be announced on how this will be spent in this area of measurement and mitigation. We have the Pipes Act with PEMSA pipeline rules, oil and gas licensing with the Bureau of Land Management for sites on government land, and LNG terminal approvals for new export terminals that could potentially have additional rules attached to them related to methane emissions intensity. There's the carbon border adjustment mechanism from the European Union, and they're focused on having more and more data reported under OGMP 2.0. So if you are exporting or your downstream is exporting towards European Union, this probably will sooner or later come your way in some form or shape. Then we have the topic of differentiated gas, responsibly sourced gas, and that ties into regulations as well, because for this to really take off in the US, with utility customers, the state public utility commissions will have to approve procedures on what constitutes low emissions gas or better than the standard, same for FERC. And last but not least, we have the SEC with climate disclosure rules that are coming, where for oil and gas operators, clearly methane emissions will be material. And again, it's yet to be seen how this will be implemented. So again, it's meant as the big overview. I think the focus for today is EPA compliance in particular, but we should keep this in mind as we're talking long-term strategies.
Yeah, suffice to say, no segment is going to be left untouched, from upstream transportation, midstream, downstream, these regulations will touch the entire market segments of the oil and gas industry and other ancillary industries as well, where methane is a feedstock, or volatile organic compounds are of issue. Leaks are of a concern. Bob, what do you see, with these proposed federal regulations that are, issued or pending? What are some of these most material themes and changes you see versus historical regulation?
Yeah, thank you, Josh. It's a fast-moving area, and Stefan just did a great job walking through, kind of taking us through the landscape. A few of the themes that I see, one of them is very much about technology. And there's some good news there, because many of us who've labored in these vineyards for a long time have felt that the technologies have rapidly been scaling up to actually detect and increasingly even get closer to being able to measure the emissions so people can find them sooner and address them. Because of anybody listening to this, and certainly those in operations, the last thing you want to do is have your valuable products going into the atmosphere. You want to find those leaks, but given the different settings in which folks are producing or transporting natural gas, it's challenging to find those in advance. So the technologies have been improving, and Stefan and other colleagues have really been offering some really great options for that. For the first time, for example, the Environmental Protection Agency, in their current draft methane regulations, have really stepped forward in a significant way to try to invite folks to use those advanced technologies, even for the purposes of compliance. Their regulation is still in draft form, and there are issues to be addressed to make sure those incentives work. But fundamentally, they've set up a matrix now that people can use in order to do more frequent actual surveys of their sites to look for these emissions and rely upon that for compliance. I won't get into the details of it, but that's a really important step forward. And I want to commend EPA for doing that. And Stefan and I and others are part of efforts to kind of provide EPA with good operational information so they can make sure the incentives are aligned to do that. So technology and use of advanced technology being part of the regulations. And by the way, the same thing is happening in Colorado in particular, and I believe in New Mexico as well. So all of the regulators are figuring out, how do we incentivize the use of these new technologies? And a second big theme would be one of transparency. I think we all are seeing lots of media coverage of emissions events and about differences between top-down and bottoms-up estimates. Those estimates from using, be they satellites or others, and then the bottoms up at the ground and the differences. And so increasingly, if you have an emissions event, it's going to be transparent. It's going to be known. And in that regard, and then I'll stop for a minute, those are kind of the two big themes. But on continuing with transparency, the Environmental Protection Agency draft regs that I mentioned earlier has a provision related to super emitter response program, where third parties who already have begun kind of monitoring for these emissions, if they see a very large emission event, those so-called super emitters, there's a provision where they would be notifying operators who they think are responsible, and those operators would have some duty of responding to that. So the days when I think there will be these, yes, there'll be these events, but they'll only know about them if they happen to be reported formally. Those days are past, and it's I think the regulations consistently are going to make this increasingly transparent. I'll pause there.
Yeah. I think, Stefan, this is maybe where the technology development side and the efforts that Kuva has been putting into continuous visual monitoring at oil and gas facilities. Speak to the challenges of keeping pace with these various regulations and pending, and keeping your technology fit for purpose that will provide Amy the data that she needs in the future to be transparent. How do you keep pace with what's going on? You're on mute, Stefan.
My apologies. Yeah, that's a good question. We definitely keep close tab on what's happening regulatory-wise. We are engaging closely with agencies where possible, also together with other advanced measurement solution providers. But I think in the picture, what we're seeing is, I think EPA has put a lot of thought into it and states as well. So I think the ability to use advanced technologies for regulatory compliance will come. But that's just the beginning. I think what we are seeing in working with operators is that an actually bigger challenge is to jointly design the right workflows that the operator can make efficient use of the detection data that is being found to respond to emission events. And particularly when it comes to continuous monitoring, the challenge is you don't want to react to every little chatter, but at the same time, if something important happens, you want the field to be informed. So going forward, regulatory compliance will come with advanced tech from Kuva and from others, but making it work in the field is the real challenge, and it's the real effort going forward in the next 6 to 12 months.
Yeah. I think those feedback loops on the workflows, on how we respond to regulation is how we develop trust within our organizations. What gets measured gets controlled, can be reported, can be fixed in a transparent way. And I think certainly, a Kuva output is an Amy input in the sense of the so what question. What do I want to do with this? Is this gas within my regulatory boundaries? Is this of concern? Do we know about this? And then also building the internal trust to put someone behind a windshield to act upon that data. And I think it's critical that the workflows are there to allow for ingestion of data, and to develop a consistent approach, a consistent response. And I think that's going to be critical, in my opinion, is consistency. I like to tell my team, if you're going to be wrong, be consistently wrong. At least we can consistently fix it going forward. And when I think about measurement, and that's what my takeaway from these regulations is, the drive to solving a measurement problem. Taxation, greenhouse gas reporting, cross-border tax adjustments, CapEx, OpEx. These are all yardsticks of measurement within a company's organizations. And so when I think of measurement myself, measuring what we own, where we own it, how many compressors do I have? Does it emit to atmosphere? Is it a recip or a centrifugal? Are my tanks controlled? What are the rocks that we're producing from? Is there solution gas? How often does it happen? One of the things I think about, even like measurements, is an example of a pig trap. It's a simple pig trap. Every time you open it, it's a volume of gas. How do we go about measuring how many times we open? And I imagine, right now it's a wax crayon on the side of the trap, where 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and at the end of the year you count up your number of hash marks. But it's little things like that, how we capture that data. And it's not just how much is coming out, but in terms of frequency, blowdowns, captures, how much did we sequestrate into the ground? When I think the actual leak detection and measurement, LDAR, it's leak detection and repair. It's measurement of efforts against what we know to be true of what is leaking and what is venting, and how we respond to that, so that we can demonstrate the transparency side. We can pay the taxes that are due rightfully, no more, no less. And we can put on our public disclosure statements exactly what a company's liabilities are operating, as they transition to a low carbon economy. And all of these work together to, performance and compliance. Amy, when you look at measurement from your perspective within these regulations, how important are the numbers now that you're putting into those data models?
Very. I think I'm going to echo what Bob and Stefan have been saying. To me, the essence of these roles really boils down to a singular problem, that the emissions we're reporting in our GHG reports or our emission inventories from a bottom-up perspective align with observations made from a top-down approach, be it satellites or flyovers. And this is all really in service to ensure that when companies like WES commit to reducing our emissions, we're accurately accounting and being held accountable for our claimed footprint. So it's just vital that we have measurement and automation on all sorts of our field processes. And it's also vital that if we're installing an air monitor to help reconcile what we're seeing in the field from our data, that is also accurate, that it has low error bars. So trying to fit all of this together is tricky, but it's certainly doable.
Yeah, it's certainly tricky, and that is that data tsunami. And in some days it might feel like herding cats, but I think like eating an elephant. It's done one bite at a time. Bob, when you look at the variety of regulations and policies that Stefan outlined from the 10,000-foot view, where do we start? Where does a person start if they haven't already within their organization of taking that first step with a dash of risk that things may change? Because we use the word pending. There's lots of pending on the horizon. I think a lot of people in the audience are looking to polish their crystal ball and find a North Star which they can work towards.
Yeah, it's a great question, Josh, and some great metaphors here. I like the tsunami. There are times that I've used the term regulanche. It's like an avalanche of regulations coming your way, and it can feel a little bit overwhelming. And as we've said, and you just pointed out, these are proposed, so we don't know the exact final contours that these various regulations are going to take, and some of them may go through the legal process, et cetera, and they're different, So I think so a couple of things. One, find an expert to help you, an expert who not only understands sort of the deep regulatory details, but also how those relate to actual operations. And be it a consultant, or if you are a larger organization, you have those kinds of experts in your organization. Either way, start getting a feel for what those issues are and how they're emerging as they apply to you. But the second thing, and this builds very much on what Stefan and Amy were saying, and of course, Amy is sitting in a seat where she lives this every day, but it also means deeply understanding your own operational setting, the equipment you have, et cetera. And I mean, operators, of course, begin with a good understanding of that. You couldn't be in business if you didn't. But what are all of these different potential sources of methane emissions, and understanding your systems as they exist today to look for that, and then how maybe those systems can be modified, adjusted, improved, or even just leveraged in order to create this system where you are regularly looking for these potential leaks. And as you said, it's also about repair. I mean, you want to, as quickly as you can, find those leaks so that you can repair them, but also so that you can learn from them. And then you can address those issues that come up in other parts of your facility. These regulations get quite detailed. Another trend I would say is they are covering an increasing percentage of the kit that you have out there in the field. So something that may not be covered today could be covered tomorrow. So you want to just look across that. And I think, stepping back, looking for both the risk and the cost side, what the risk is of those emissions being discovered, what it might cost you. Stefan talked about the methane fee coming forward, and that can be quite substantial. So what it might cost you, that's the risk side, not to mention reputational risk as they become increasingly transparent, and there's a big headline attributing something to you, which may or may not have been your event. So that's part, but also the opportunity part of this, because customers increasingly are looking for those suppliers who are addressing this issue, all kinds of stakeholders, as have been laid out and talked about before, whether they be in the financial community, governments, non-governmental organizations. They're looking at companies and saying, okay, what are you doing to address this? And having not just a story, but actually good evidence about what you were doing and how you're being front-footed also could create some opportunity with your customers and those other stakeholders. So that's kind of where I would start, as opposed to, and it'd be very easy to do this, just be, sort of the deer in the headlights. Get ahead of it now, while these regulations are being shaped, and before they've all been finalized. So when it happens, you're already ahead of the game.
Kind of linking some, workflow, starting to get going. When I look at these boxes here, it's speaking to one is operations, management, accounting, production accounting, financial accounting, deploying capital decisions. There's a needle being thread through the entire organization, and no one's going to be left untouched. No longer is it just a regulatory or the safety or HSE, I'm managing a small program. It's a entire company effort now when it comes to dealing, complying, and moving into low carbon future. Stefan, what characteristics would describe a technology's ability to help and work with all these departments, not just the operators say I got a leak, but the financial accountant, the CFO, the CEO? What are the characteristics of technology that transcend and serves all these departments well?
Yeah, thank you. So there's these different stakeholders that will all have to deal with emissions data. There's the operations, who is to root cause analysis and fix. There's environmental compliance. There's, I would say, finance, dealing with risk, and accounting or carbon accounting as a fourth discipline, who increasingly will be focused on OGMP, differentiated gas ESG reporting. So I think the key part is to get started to focus on the most, I think, impactful topic. And I believe these are super emitters, and especially intermittent super emitters. So Enervis, the market research company, just came out with a report last week where they said they expect that the US oil and gas industry has to pay for 880,000 tons of methane emissions from super emitters in 2025. So that's about $1.1 billion. So that's, I think, gonna jumpstart the business case discussion. And I think that's the place to start. So if you as an operator are early in the journey, start with a pilot trial, make sure field operations is part of it and owns it, not just the environmental team. Think about early on how detected data is used and how you can come up with programs to systematically address super emitters. And that's going to drive everything. You're going to get better environmental.
Yeah, I think that speaks to Bob saying
and then your ESG is going to look better and so on.
Yeah, I think that speaks to Bob just saying
Sorry,
start.
go ahead.
And aiming as an organization on your side, being threading that needle through the entire organization. Bringing things forward, such as how are we going to monitor intermittent super emitters? From my view, of an intermittent super emitter poses one, a reputational risk with the third-party super emitter surveillance program. It poses a climate change initiative problem. But there's wins that are to be had, and what I believe to be true is that getting these wins now and hammering down that fat tail, so that if the 20% accounts for 80% of the emission sources, we're getting smart about capital deployment of where the problem that we're picking off first. And I think that's, in my opinion, that's how we then build organizational trust at the field level, to the roustabouts, to the pumpers, to the engineer, to the accountant, authorizing the capital purchases, and then the ongoing OpEx that are landing on the manager's plates. you speak to how you're working through your organization to, build that trust and bring the message forward of, this is where we're starting, and how do you feel, companies are, in response to your initiatives?
Yeah, I mean, truly, I think if you want this technology to not keep you as the environmental team up at all hours or keep you on call every weekend, you have to have it integrated with your operations team. We have a system set up where all our alerts go to an incident command center that has staffed 24/7, and they can dispatch the nearest operator or our LDAR team to the site in order to check what's going on. I think in order for this to work, you have to build that system with your operations team from the get-go, whether that's having them help you set the questions you want that system to answer, and also then just checking in with them after you've done the install to make sure your system isn't having a slew of false positives that's driving them crazy and making them angry, right? And lose faith in that system. So it's important to us to just not only select a system that can give us the answers that we want, but also that works well with our field. And then, the proof is in the pudding, right? Like if that all works together, you're going to want to use that data. You're going to want to keep looking at it rather than just saying, well, it's just giving me readings that don't make sense or I don't understand them, so I'm just going to ignore it. So the way I see this all working together in the future is that, let's say we get a super emitter alert from the EPA for a facility that we have monitoring on it. We can go back through our data for that time period and see if we've already had a report on it through our monitoring system that the field's checked in on. We can check our SCADA data systems to see if operationally was there some sort of issue going on that we already knew about. And then as a last resort, right, we can dispatch our LDAR team to go check on things. So it's going to end up being a little bit of a triage effort. And like everybody's mentioned already, I mean, it's coming from the top down. So you have to be able to build that trust from the bottom within your organization in order to sell it all the way through to the top.
I think all good relationships in life, whether they're personal, business, or business to regulatory, is around good communication and dialogue. I think one of the communication outcomes on this is being consistent in messaging, consistent in approach, and good communication builds that trust within organizations, and that trust leads to transparency, and transparency leads to outcomes, which lead to better conversations. And it's a positive feedback loop that one that spirals up as opposed to spiraling down. And I think there's going to be learnings, for those companies that have been deep into this for the last 5 years, 10 years, they may be ahead. But for those that are just starting, it's building that trust of knowing that, hey, we're going to go through a few trials and tribulations of establishing a workflow that works for a company size, for its ERP systems, for its culture, for its geographical footprint. And I can only imagine, Amy, when you look at these regulations, these are, transcending state boundaries. How do you stay on top, or how do you find a consistent approach to technology that will address Colorado, New Mexico, Texas, federal, state, county? What are you looking for in technology?
Yeah, I mean, I think it goes back to my first observation that a lot of these rules really seem to be driving towards a reconciliation, right, of bottom up, top down emissions. When we were looking at testing out new monitors for WES, we wanted to initially set some goals, some boundaries for testing so that we would have, realistic expectations of the system after we installed it. We knew we wanted to focus on methane monitoring to see how a system could support our methane emission reduction goals. We knew we wanted to see if a system could help us with what seems to be that evolving regulatory framework, leaning more and more towards like an intensity and verification program. And finally, we wanted a system that could act as a safeguard or insurance against the increasing air monitoring flyovers and now the Quad OB super emitter program. So We took that laundry list to Montrose and asked them if they knew any monitors that could match our goals. They pointed us towards the Kuva system, where that camera feature that's integrated within the system, I found really appealing, because in my EMP days, we were using smaller point sensors that, I'm sure everyone has a familiarity with. A challenge I found with those is that they just have a limited feedback on the origin of an alert. So they could give you wind direction or maybe a vague sense of the equipment area that leak could be coming from. But what happens is you're directing your operations team to go out on site with really sparse data, and that becomes super frustrating for everybody. So pretty quickly as a solution, I started cross-referencing all the alert times with our security camera footage to try and see if, had there been a thief hatch left open after a truck hauler had been on site, or was there some sort of equipment maintenance going on at that same time? So all that's to say is, what are we looking for? I think we're looking for a system that has an integrated camera, something that gives us a real visual source of emissions, so that our team, which is pretty lean, and for our operations team, who we're trying to build with trust with, can go out and find the issues quickly, and we're doing what we're saying we're going to do.
Excellent. Stefan, walk us through a story. Tell us about Kuva and and looking at the complexity of a simple looking tank farm here.
Yeah, thank you. So a tank farm is a good example of the challenges that we see. And just briefly, you can see a Kuva camera here on the right. It's integrated with infrared and visible camera, edge compute, communications, anemometer for wind speed and quantification. But really what it does is it scans the site just like a security camera. And if you could go to the next slide, please. It does so continuously. And then what we're seeing often is a so-called super emitter, and very often it's intermittent. So this is an example here. Just to be clear, this is not Western Midstream, it's anonymized, but it's a typical case where, say, this is produced water tank, the emissions only come out if the tank is 3/4 full, it's tied into VRU, something isn't set up right, that causes this to happen, the VRU doesn't go on. That's the sort of, we can pinpoint it's tank number 5, and then like Amy or her equivalent and the kind of control center can then react to that, compared with SCADA data like Amy mentioned, and then decide if and when and how to dispatch the field team.
Bob, it's regulation boils down to interpretation and execution, and defining the regulatory boundaries of which gas emits from. Amy will have an alert response to this, and they have to make a call. Is this, how do you feel? What do you see in technology such as continuous visual, working towards defining where it falls within the boundary of said regulation, and building on certainty, so that people then can respond to it with certain that there is a need to, both from either compliance perspective or from the opportunity voluntarily, the volunteer side of being, this is just a good thing to do. Describe how technology works in regulation, and defining its boundaries so that Amy can make a decision on her side.
Yeah, it's a very good question, and I'll answer that one, and maybe I'll also take a quick crack at one that I saw in the chat, which was also a really good question. Still being defined, but as I mentioned earlier, the EPA regulations and now the state regulations are doing this as well now, are set up so that, it used to be that the only technology that really was approved for use would be, the newer technology would be the oil and gas camera, people going around and looking at optical gas imaging camera, kind of quarterly or twice a year. Now it's increasingly moving toward other forms of technology, including particularly continuous emissions monitors as an example. And in terms of benefits of that, on the regulatory side, I mean, there are many potential benefits, but one of them on the regulatory side is that if you have a continuous emissions monitor and can establish when the emissions started and when it ended, either naturally or because you've gone out and fixed it, that can help define what the fee or the penalty or whatever can be, or also, of course, be used in a calculation of what the actual amount of those emissions were, which is really important in a regulatory sense. I think this is very much of an evolving picture, but I think the sort of direction of travel is clear, I think, in favor of and toward use of technologies that are much more frequently looking and much more comprehensively looking for these potential emissions. And just quickly on that, let me add, we had a very good question, which was, and having sat in a company and watched political currents change from time to time, and therefore proposed regulations being changed or being pulled away, pulled back, et cetera, et cetera. I definitely think all the details of the regulations could change at the federal level. They could change at the state level if there are changes within the political world. But I think the direction of travel here of increasing transparency will continue, because the tools are out there, the satellites and the overflights and so on, where these emissions events will be publicly disclosed in one form or another. And whatever the government is mandating or prescribing in these regulations, however that may change, so many different stakeholders, including investors and even your own employees, I mean, they want to know about this. And so I think the direction of travel here is clear, and whatever happens in the political environment that may change the details of the regulations, it is going to be the case that there will be transparency around this, and your stakeholders will want to know what you were doing, how are you using advanced technologies, or what you're doing within your business in order to address this. And the last thing is, if natural gas continues to be as valuable of a commodity, not only in the United States, but of course globally with LNG trade, et cetera, people are not going to want to lose that product to the atmosphere.
Yeah, good words. Yeah, I think in terms of transparency and intermittency and super emitters, I think, going forward, the true area under the curve is like what we see here on the screen on the left-hand side. It's the intermittency. Had one just taken a singular measurement at the peak, the area under the curve would be a rectangle, which, grossly over-reports what that emission source. And the outcome of that, on measurement, also then leads to better capital decisions about what to implement on the facility. What size of VRU do I need? Do I need a high pressure separator and a low pressure separator and a vertical retention tower? Maybe I should change the plunger cycles on my wells. Maybe I can cycle them off different. Maybe my envelope thief hatch gaskets are just not, haven't been cleaned up, repaired in a while. And then that true area under the curve is what goes back to all those other areas of operation, production, management, and financial. That is the number that is on that thread and being pulled to the organization. Operations gets to resolve the issue based on good data. Production accounting and greenhouse gas accountants get to report a solid number. The financial side is comfortable with the capital allocation, and it's not just going to be stranded capital into an asset or it just didn't quite work. And then to the CEO, CFOs is a mark of an organization's true carbon footprint and how they report back to the market through publicly traded statements. And so measurement is critical in my opinion, and then that is a key needle. Because not all things are even. we have Monday mornings, we have Friday afternoons, we have negative gas prices, we have forest fires, we have flooding, force majeure events, and things are up and things are down. And it's those moments in between that count that will lead to transparency, the data systems that can integrate in to answer the organizational workflow of transparency, reduction, repair, capital deployment, and taking those first step initiatives of a long now outlook, because the world has an insatiable appetite for energy, and most certainly we can produce that in North America. We're near the point where we can open up a Q&A. I just wanted to give an opportunity to the panels for some final thoughts. Bob, final thought before we go to Q&A.
Yeah, a final thought, and I think this runs through all of our comments, is it is really easy to look at all of this and quickly feel overwhelmed. But I think the comments here, and particularly what Amy and Stefan said, is start getting your arms around it. Do a pilot, because the kinds of the ways of finding the emissions, the technologies, the systems you use are going to have to be very much tailored to your business, and consider this a business and operational activity. So that's one. And two, get out ahead of this. Try to see the opportunity in this to, as you would another continuous improvement efforts within your business, because all of you are doing that, who are in the business world and out in operations. See this as that kind of opportunity. Partner up with the Amy's of the world within your business, and see the opportunity as well as the challenge, and get ahead of it.
Excellent words. Stefan?
Yeah, I think for all operators who are thinking about how to go about it, in the end, we will all have to build a business case. And I think my final thoughts here are, think about the business case as a cross-departmental exercise. Because by, for example, deploying continuous monitoring as part of a bigger picture overall solution that may have other things like overflights and so on in it as well, you have to look at the benefits to the environmental group, say reduced OGI inspection. You have to look at the benefits to the operations group in terms of reduced unscheduled callouts to the field crew. You have to think about the financial side in terms of methane fee risk mitigation. And then you have to think about the carbon accounting side in terms of the benefits for the companies, as in future potential price premium for differentiated gas, EC commitments and the likes. And really thinking about this cross-departmental, it's not easy, because now you have to work across organizations, different VPs. But that, I think, is needed to really scale comprehensive emissions management throughout an organization.
Amy, last words are yours.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'll probably end up echoing mostly what Bob was saying. I think we're at a pivotal point in time in this industry where you better fish or cut bait. I would not want to be at a place where I'm just waiting around to see what rules are going to be passed. I'd want to start seriously evaluating, where are the weaknesses in our emission estimates? Where do we have a lack of data? What data can we refine or start collecting at an even finer level? Do we need to monitor? And if so, for what reason? I'd say, especially for monitoring, there can be a really sharp learning curve in deployment and finding which system or systems work for you or not. Approaching a company like Montrose that already has a ton of experience with these systems can help flatten that curve. But my takeaway is that not all is lost. These are really cool, fun, exciting, exhilarating projects that gets the whole company involved. So there's definitely a path forward, but if you haven't already, you better get to working.
That's right. Roll up your sleeves, get going. Oh, we got a few questions here in the Q&A. Audience, please keep them coming. And of course, on the screen here, you can always email info@sensible-edp.com, and we'll happily connect the panel back to your question. panel, starting here is what would be the most cost-effective technology to discern high CH4 emitting orphan oil and gas wells and tank batteries? Stefan, I might know your answer. Um, what have you guys seen, Amy? Um, cost effective is, again, open to interpretation and an outcome. I'll kick off saying, from what I've seen is one is just good data capture systems, AVO workflows, audio, visual, and olfactory, giving people a means of communicating back. That's the first line, is opening up communication, whether it's a tin can telephone, it's a mobile app on Android or iPhone, but a way to encourage and incentivize that bottom up field level communication. And sometimes it just goes, I know that surface casing vent is emitting. Can I just throw up a smoke signal here, and someone I know will respond to it? But at least it's getting that things going. And then I think it also then speaks to geographies and access. A northern British Columbia helicopter access only versus a Gulf of Mexico helicopter boat access to, Greeley, Colorado, where you can drive a square mile and eventually find an entrance into the facility. Depends on the technology deployed, and whether you're looking just for the smoke alarm or you're looking for that measurement approach. And I think that when it comes down to it, is going to be the data systems that make it cost effective, because then the data system will then dictate the workflows on how it gets resolved.
Josh, this is Bob. I can't believe I'm offering thoughts on this, because I'm probably the least technological person. We have Stefan here. But there are a couple of questions, and there's one to me about what the single biggest technological advancement was. And I just kind of want to make a general point, a couple of general points. One is that which technology works best will depend very much on the particular setting in which you're using it, your operations, what you've got out there. And this is why I think Stefan's point about piloting and working with different ones is really important. The second thing, though, that I think is consistent, and this is the biggest advancement of all, is those technologies that allow you to more consistently and frequently go out and look for the sources of emissions. There are many advancements that have happened, for example, in pneumatic controllers. So, they're lower bleed or no bleed, and they're all kind of individual advancements. But the biggest thing, because many of the very large emissions events are what they call stochastic, they're not predictable, they may or may not be random, but the way that you can find those consistently is to get out there and use the technology, whatever you're doing, that can more frequently look for those kinds of events. So I think that's kind of a thread that runs through it all. And I'll see if Amy and Stefan want to add to that.
Yeah, I think the key is to set a goal for what you want your monitoring system to do ahead of time. These systems, there's no silver bullet, right, that can answer every question. If there is, call me, because I want it. So, make sure you have a framework for what you want the system to do before you install it. And then ask the providers, what's your quantification error rate? What's your probability of detection? Get a sense of, is this going to capture what I want it to capture, or should I keep looking? There's going to be a lot of sensor providers out there. It's hard to know what is going to be a good one until you just start testing them.
I think this leads into a question here that's, speaking to being oil and gas operators are calculating their emissions to report to the EPA and are facing changes that could significantly boost the amount of methane they report. Enervis, a subsidiary of energy-focused SaaS firm Enervis, has found that the proposed regulations would more than double 2021 reported methane and increase overall carbon dioxide CO2 equivalent emissions by 41%. And they're looking just for our thoughts on this. And maybe I'll sum this up by saying there's currently two sets of books. There's currently the set of books, with the existing subpart W, and changes to pending changes to subpart W and how we calculate. And we've granted new tools and technologies to measure, and we're advancing on solving the measurement problem. Perhaps we can just base this response around what are your thoughts on these two sets of books, and how do we become to reconcile? And do you feel there's a desire within industry and regulation to bring these sets of books together to become one?
Yeah, great question. Maybe I go first here. Definitely there's the desire for this elusive solution that does continuous whole site quantification that's super accurate. But I think that's still a little ways out. So EPA has basically increased the emission factors. That's why the total emissions calculated will go up. And the only option an operator has is to go component by component to prove with some sort of measurement that their actual emissions are lower. And then there's the extra factor, which is the so-called super emitter events. And that's probably the one part where an operator can have the most impact, because these detections, the way it's going to work is if a third-party plane finds a super emitter event, reports it to EPA under subpart under Quad OB, then the operator has to prove that it was short duration. If they can't prove it, the presumption most likely will be, oh, it was there for the last 90 days, last OGI or so. And that can very quickly run up to $100,000 or more, depending on what it was. So if you think about lowering your tax, your coming methane fee bill, thinking about how to not get found with super emitters and intermittent super emitters is probably a good start.
Well, if someone who's on the industry side, policy regulation, the time you've spent, it's sometimes, we want regulation to help us to be better. And I feel there's a sense in industry that, allowing us to actually report, better means of better emission factors, better measurement approach. Well, the ultimate outcome of performance-based policy and regulations where we can demonstrate performance, total vent, total leak, or their lack of no vent, no leak on that side. How do we continue to work within, with pending regulations and regulators and, the data that we're collecting to drive these kind of like one set of books and demonstrating, great performance?
Yeah, it's a great question. And Stefan just gave a really excellent answer starting us off here. But I mean, the answer to that is really to engage with your regulators. And there are a number of ways to do that. As I mentioned, Stefan and I work together with a number of different companies that are pressing on this very point. It is difficult because the EPA is regulating under the Clean Air Act, which has some pretty difficult strictures. So it is hard even for them to be able to go as far as this. But providing that real world sort of input and operational input on what's happening out there and how important it is for companies to be able to provide that real-time data. I think the truth is there are going to be multiple sets of books for different purposes, but I think as a company, the key thing is you're getting your arms around this and then sharing that information and including as input into the regulatory process. Over the long term, I feel confident, as I say, the direction of travel is positive, but in the meantime, you kind of have to control your own fate and control your own destiny and work with others to kind of make this point.
Bob, perfect. You took us exactly to the top of the hour. Thank you, panel, for everything, your discussion, the conversation, and allow me the honor to host this webinar tonight. And everyone in the crowd, thank you for listening. Certainly, if there's any offline questions, info@sensible-edp.com, and we'll route your questions to the panelists and get a response to you. And thank you.
No, thank you. It was a pleasure listening behind the scenes to the conversations that took place this morning, this afternoon, wherever you are in the world. I know we have a very worldwide audience joining us today, so we appreciate those who are able to stay up late. And we have a lot of people who have sent comments to us that they can't wait to go back and rewatch this again. So really valuable information. Thank you to Amy, Josh, Stefan, Bob, and your teams for a fantastic presentation. We're going to conclude today's event, and please provide us all the feedback via the survey that's going to come out in just a couple of hours. So have a wonderful day, everybody, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you all.
Thank you very much. This was great.